All right, so I'm going to move on to think a little bit around social understanding and the social communication differences that our children can experience. And then I'll just go on to look a little bit about, just to give you an overview, in my opinion, what good SEND support could look like. And then just like conclusions and, you know, where we want to go. I'd love for us to continue this conversation. So we'll get to that bit at the end. So when we're thinking about the social understanding and the social differences that our young people have, so one of the main areas of difference is this element that's called theory of mind. Now, we're evolved on the planet over millions of years to survive, and all species on the planet survive by operating in social groups. So you might have seen this on wildlife programs on TVs, like the emperor penguins. They survive in the Arctic by huddling together in a snowstorm, and humans are no different to that. We're evolved to survive by being in social groups. As a result, what we have evolved is this mechanism called theory of mind, which is an innate ability that neurotypical people have to make a good guess about what somebody else's perspective might be. So like, I don't need to sit where you're sitting to have a good idea about what you can see, and you don't need to sit where I am to have a good idea about what I can see. And that means that at all times in our social interactions, we're able to keep those conversations flowing. We're able to think about what might it feel like to be the other person, and how can I make sure that my message is delivered so they understand it and we all, you know, we keep it running smoothly. And the reason that that matters so much to us is because we're evolved for that to, you know, to survive that way. So we're automatically programmed to do that. Now, there are several areas of the brain that are responsible for all firing at once for this mechanism to happen. And neuroimaging shows that if you're neurodiverse, there are lower levels of grey matter in those areas of the brain. So this is not an automatic ability that neurodiverse people have. So you can see in this little cartoon up here, you've got the mum on the phone saying to the little girl, what are you playing with? And the little girl saying, I'm playing with this. So if you're neurotypical, you would understand mum doesn't know what this is because mum can't see it. So if you're neurotypical, you'd be saying, I'm playing with my toy car, or whatever she's playing with. So that's what I mean, there are those differences. Now, there's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist called Daniel Kahneman who wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he identifies these two systems of thinking that we have. System 1, fast and intuitive. System 2, it's slow, but it's the deep concentration. And we've got these two systems and they're constantly working in balance. And system 2 is very lazy. So if we can do something quickly, we prefer to do that. And you'll know yourself, if you've got a task that means you need to sit down and concentrate on it, you'll be thinking, oh God, I can't be bothered to do that. I'll put it off and put it off. That's because that system is lazy. Now, it's because also it's very exhausting. So although we have a brain and body, they're effectively one pool of resources. 20% of our daily calories is used by the brain. So concentrating costs resources to us, which is why we try to avoid using system 2. We prefer to use system 1. So, for example, if I say to you now what's 2 plus 2, that's a system 1 because you've practiced it so many times, you know the answer's 4. If I say to you what's 347 times 272, you probably haven't even started to try that. So this is like automatic processing that we've got going on. We don't want to engage with that deep thinking, deep concentration. Now, if you're neurotypical, walking into a room like this and making social contact, engaging and judging other people is a system 1 task. It takes no deep concentration for us. We can do it, we can instantly come in, say hello, make introductions, make people feel comfortable, make sure it's going to go well, that interaction that we have. If you're neurodiverse, that is a system 2. It's not coming automatically to you, which is why we have these levels that the team have described here of like watching people and having to concentrate deeply. So it's like watching people interacting and collecting blocks of data. When people say hello, oh, they say this. When people make a joke, oh, they do that. So I've got to learn that script and then cut and paste that. And that cut and paste will mean I'm working very hard to make sure nobody else knows that I don't really understand what's going on, because that is a system 2 task for those children. And that means that children who are in those social settings all day long, for whom that social is a system 2, they're absolutely exhausted. Using system 2 for any long period of time is absolutely exhausting. So if we think about what are the kind of difficulties that our children encounter as a result of not having this good theory of mind, the first one is you can only understand what somebody says in a literal sense. You can't work out what they might mean. So here's an example. One of the parent mentors that supports our Clacton groups has autism, and she's a very bright lady. She's got 4 children, she's had a professional career, and never got maths at school. She had to go back as an adult to do her maths. And she, as a child, was thinking, I don't think I'm dumb, but I must be stupid because all these others are getting it and I'm not getting it at all. So as an adult, she went back to college to get her maths GCSE, sat down with the tutor, and the tutor says, right, we'll start from the beginning. We'll start with tens and units. So this mum says, well, I get tens, but what's kitchen units got to do with maths? So obviously then the tutor's able to say, oh no, it's not kitchen units. I believe they say tens and zeros now, but they didn't back then. So that's an example of, first of all, when you understand the meaning of the words, looking at this, like she had completely misunderstood the meaning, so she was stuck there. Once it was explained to her that it's tens and zeros, oh, she's fine. She went on and she did very well and got her maths GCSE. And the other part of this is she wasn't able to think, the teacher can't possibly mean kitchen units. She can't possibly mean that. It makes no sense. She must mean something else. Let me ask her. So you don't have the ability to do that if you're neurodiverse, because you have this poor theory of mind, weaker theory of mind, because of the levels of activity that there are in the brain. So here's another one, is that if you're not able to think about something from somebody else's point of view, you're not going to be very good at filtering out how to deliver this message in a nice way. So again, one of the members of the Maze team, who's neurodivergent, said to me the other week, those Clacton coffee mornings are absolute chaos. They're very badly organised, chaotic. Neither me or my colleagues like coming because it's chaos. I was like, okay then, good job I live in this neurodiverse world so I can filter that out, you know. But that's a really good example of, I didn't take that, and she messaged me later saying, oh, I didn't understand your reaction. Have I upset you? Because I don't mean to upset you. And I was able to message back saying, I know whatever you say comes from a good intention, so no, you're absolutely fine. But in the world, most neurotypicals are not that tolerant about other people delivering very direct messages. So here's an example here that of one of the mums I supported, went to pick up her daughter from primary school, and she took with her her teenage son who had autism. And in school that day, they'd been learning about the healthy food pyramid, about, you know, you must eat this, lots of this kind of food, not much of this. This is what the health consequences are if you have a large body or if you have a large waist circumference and so on. That's what he'd learned. So while they're picking up his sister in the playground, he walks up to this lady with a large body in the playground, taps her on the shoulder, says, excuse me, you're morbidly obese. So obviously this lady's like, how dare you say that to me? It's very rude, very rude, very rude. But when the mum got home, obviously you can imagine how embarrassed she was. She was apologising like anything. When they got home, the boy said, well, we've just learnt about the food pyramid. Obviously this lady doesn't understand about the food pyramid, because otherwise she wouldn't be making those choices, would she? So you can see there had been a good intention in what he had said. But for most of our young people, that means that they can be considered disrespectful or rude. Here's another one. If you don't have a good understanding about somebody else, what they might know, what their skill set might be, how would you ever think about asking for help? And so this is a big deal in classrooms. Another example from my own teaching practice, I remember one of my colleagues came to speak to me about a young person in their class who had come to school, was autistic, was absolutely brilliant at maths. And in the lesson was a bit problematic because he was always shouting out the answers and always knew everything, and then suddenly stopped answering any of the questions. And the teacher came to me to say, can you come and have a word with him about how important it is to answer the questions and do the work? So I went to speak to him, and when we tried to unpick what was going on there, he said to me, well, I'll tell you the reason why I'm not answering the questions. Last week, teacher says to the class, what's 7 times 7? If the teacher doesn't know the answer to 7 times 7, first of all, I'm not telling her. Second of all, how can that teacher teach me anything if they don't know what 7 times 7 is? So I had to then explain, no, the teacher does know the answer to 7 times 7. The teacher has been to university, has got a degree, they know how to do that maths. But what the teacher wants to know is who in this class knows the answer to 7 times 7. You've got these kids over here, they know that, and the rest of the 7 times table. These kids over here, yep, they pretty much got it, but they might need to practice. These kids over here definitely haven't got it. So when the teacher knows that, the teacher's going to give this kind of work to that group, different kind of work to that group, and the group who are struggling, they're going to have a not so complicated level of work. That's why the teacher asks questions. Oh, okay then, okay. So all of that stuff is all invisible, isn't it? So if you don't know what somebody else knows, you're probably not going to ask for help. Also, how many people would be comfortable to walk down the street and ask a random stranger to put a sharp metal implement in their mouth to check their teeth? Nobody. But we allow the dentist to do that because we understand the dentist has been to university and is trained to look after my teeth and do it without hurting me. If you don't know that, you're not going to be very happy about going to the dentist, or having your hair cut, or having your nails cut, or having your feet measured for shoes. There's a whole bunch of things you're not going to be happy about because you don't know what somebody else knows. And here's another one that a lot of our children get into problems with is managing conflict. So if you think, I want it to be this way, or I want to play the game this way, or I think Pokemon's brilliant, and somebody else thinks the opposite to you, that's going to be a big problem. And well, I'm going to say, you know, as adults, we learn to do this, but when you look at the state of the world, I'm not really sure many adults do know how to resolve conflict and have difficult conversations, but still, the idea of compromise is something mostly that we learn, isn't it? And here's a way that we might have to teach it to our children because they're not going to get that automatically. So when we have a disagreement with somebody, you know, you will try their idea first, then we'll try your idea, maybe try a mix of ideas, and then decide together what idea should we try. So you're finding a way to teach those things is something that, you know, we talk about with parents, because you've got children who will be saying, no, we're having the TV on because I'm going to play this game on my Xbox, and they're not able to see other people would like to play a different game, and so there's often fights in the household. I would say when parents come to do the Maze Specialist Parenting Programme, mostly the information they provide is about how they have such conflict at home, lots of conflict at home, meltdowns, parents stressed, mental health problems, all that kind of thing. And mostly those difficulties are unpicked and understood and stood down to a calmer level by adults just understanding this stuff about the way children understand and perceive the world around sensory differences and all the things that we've covered today. And teaching in this ability to compromise and manage conflicts, I think, is an essential part of that. So I have just delivered for you in about an hour and a bit what takes me usually about 3 to 4 weeks to go through with families. So I've given you a very condensed version, but what I just wanted you to get an overview is of the hidden difficulties that many of our children are facing. And there was recently, I've got some copies of this that I can show you, and I will email it round. There was some research done by I think this is Durham University, into it says here, they interviewed autistic young people aged between 12 to 16 who were enrolled in mainstream secondary schools and asked them about their school distress and attendance difficulties. So I've got some paper copies of that I can give you today, and I'll email this out to you. And it's really powerful about how this army of young people, and this who are increasing in number, how distressing they find that environment to be in. Key themes are the whole school environment is a problem. It's a complex interaction of difficulties. That all young people show their distress differently. It's not the same from child to child. There's a huge lack of understanding amongst the adults supporting children and support. Young people feeling like, what's the alternative for me if this doesn't feel right for me? And I think a lot of young people are wondering, well, what's the alternative for me if this is something that doesn't work? And somebody has said, a quote from a young person, it says, imagine a pit, and that pit is school, a pit full of lions. Every day you've been told to jump in, and no matter how much pain it's going to cause you, because that's what everyone else does. Sometimes they decide to add a couple of snakes. When that goes and you're just left with the hungry lions, it's still terrible, but it does get worse. So it's like really bleak, actually, how young people feel in that environment. And I just think that's really worth looking at. I can see this week I've been contacted by a researcher from Anglia Ruskin who's looking at the impact of sensory differences on young people's experience of being in school. And also through the Synapse Centre, they're also looking at sensory differences for school-age children and how that impacts upon their learning and their school experience. So there's an emerging theme here around the focus on this for young people, particularly because the outcomes for this group of young people are so poor. So obviously now what we want to think about is, well, you know, what can we do about that? How can we help those young people? Because what we want is all young people to have an education that's a good match for their needs, that they're entitled to, and that's appropriate for them. And I think that this is where we've got an opportunity to really work together and show other people what good practice could look like. So I'm going to show you two bits here that I think, two elements of SEND support. This is the first one, is a one-page profile. So when we're talking about SEND support, so this is governed by the Children and Families Act 2014. And from that you have the SEND regulations that fill out a bit more detail, and then you have the SEND Code of Practice for schools. So this is all based on the SEND Code of Practice for Schools information that schools are supposed to build their SEND provision around. And SEND provision is based on what's called a graduated approach. So you start off with a lower level of support, which is what this would look like. And then if this is not adequate, you would then move up to the next level, which is called, in Essex, we call that one planning. Different schools in different areas call that something different. It might be a person-centred plan or a pupil passport, or all different terminology, but Essex County Council refer to this process as one planning. Now, I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me start off with this first level of SEND support, which is this one-page profile, which is supposed to be written in the voice of the child. So where appropriate, it should be the child or young person really developing this. Now, it might not be possible or appropriate for that young person to do that. We would expect the family to do that so that it's properly in the voice of the child. Now, lots of schools do this and take the responsibility for doing that, and that's absolutely fine. But what we need to factor in mind there is that you'll have many children then feeling that they're going to have to give answers that's going to please the adult. And quite often I see that in some of those plans, that maybe the question has been a bit leading. They've had the adult leading them on to talk about things. And sometimes what I've seen in these one-page profiles is things like, he needs to learn to follow an adult-led instruction. That's something that very often crops up. Now, first of all, if it says he needs to learn to follow an adult-led instruction, it tells me that's not the voice of the child. Second of all, if you ask this child, what's the one thing you'd really love to be able to do at school that you can't do now? I don't think any child would say, do you know what, the thing I'd love to do more than anything is to be able to follow an adult-led instruction. So I think that seeing what's on those plans is an enormous clue about how much input has the child had. So I'm always encouraging families to have a go at doing this at home themselves, and then come forward to the school thinking of themselves as a helpful resource. And say, look, this is what we've put together at home. Just wondered if we could have a look, maybe use this as a starting point for conversation. Now, you can find many different templates for this. This is a template that I've put together that I prefer. And this is not a real child. This is based on a generic autistic child that is very common in the themes that have cropped up in conversation. So for me, the boxes would be these three. What makes me happy and people like about me? I think that's important, because where you've got a child who's maybe not engaging or distressed or needs a bit of support, it's really good to know about what are they really interested in. Oh, I know they love Minecraft. Do you know what? Let's make this maths lesson about Minecraft. Or let me just ask them about their Minecraft world and see if I can just get them at their ease a little bit. So here I've put, I love computers, especially Minecraft. I'm very good at remembering numbers. I enjoy watching my favourite YouTube videos and telling others what I know. I like to have the chance to move about, especially run outside, and I love being at home with my family. That's like typical things that children might say. So over here, these are the things that are difficult for me. I find it hard to be calm when it's noisy and crowded. I don't like getting things wrong. I struggle if I'm the last one to finish. I can't answer direct questions very well, and I find it hard to speak in front of the class. It's really common for a lot of young people. And then finally, here's how I like to be supported. I need information to be presented visually so that I can process and remember it. I do best when I have a visual schedule of what I have to do and how much have I got to do. Sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed, then I just need a quiet space so that I can self-regulate, calm down and come back again. I don't like being the centre of attention, so please find a discreet way to give me feedback away from others. I often feel overwhelmed if this is a change. A lot of our children don't like it if they're expecting to do something and they get there and actually we're doing something else today. I feel overwhelmed if there's a change, so please give me plenty of notice, preferably with some written information to help me remember. So for me, good practice would look something like this, that would be emailed out or communicated to all of the adults who are supporting that child so that there's consistency of approach. Let's remember, we're not going to ask that child a question in front of the whole school or in front of the whole class. I'm going to remember that when we're giving out the task, I need to just go over to this child and say, you're going to do, number one, you're going to do this, number two, this, number three, when you're finished, come and show me. So something as simple as writing a list and making sure that child has got that information. So that might be enough, that the child feels like, what's important, I think, is that a child feels like I'm in the driving seat here, that when I say something, the adults listen to me and they care about me because they're implementing it. What we don't want is children to feel like I'm forced to do something I don't want to do. People don't really understand me and I don't have any control over that. It's really important that children feel that they're part of this so that their voice is represented. And that might be enough, the fact that they feel that way and that it's consistently applied. But it might not be. It might need to be that it's escalated up through this graduated approach, and we move then on to the next level of SEND support, which would be one planning. So I've just got a little template here, but I will email these documents over so that you can see the full documents. I've been working with the local offer team at Essex County Council around one planning, because I think what is not fair is there is not good training for school staff around writing one plans. There's no standardised template in Essex around one planning, and there's just such enormous variety. So you never see the same template from one school to another, which I think is not right, and many of the templates I see I don't think are very good. So I've put together this template, and I have just recorded an extensive video series with Families in Focus, where we've done, one of them is around one planning, and that's going on the local offer. So the local offer now just about to upload to the local offer information about one planning, and I've been part of that process. So the information I've contributed to that's going on the local offer. I don't know if they're using my template or their own, but they'll be putting a link to our video on there as well. So I feel really passionately about this, because one of the things I know is there's this enormous volume of requests for education, health and care plans, where in fact if this was done correctly, that wouldn't need to be the case. All it takes is good one planning. I'm not saying all it takes, but in many cases, parents are then chasing an EHCP because the provision at this level is not good enough. And so parents are thinking, the only recourse I've got now is to chase something that's legally enforceable, because the school are not putting in place the provision that my child needs. So for me, by the way, in case you didn't know this, the SEND Code of Practice identifies 4 broad areas of need. So many families are told your child can't have a plan because academically they're doing just fine. But cognition and learning is only one part of the Code of Practice, the SEND Code of Practice. The others are communication and interaction, sensory and physical needs, social, emotional and mental health. Now, if you're neurodiverse, you will have a difference in all 4 of those areas. So saying your child doesn't need it because they're fine when they're here, that's not a good enough answer. If you've got a neurodiverse child, they should be receiving support. Whether it's at one-page profile or one planning will be different from child to child. So, bearing in mind that the Code of Practice says one plan should be reviewed 3 times a year, so good practice would be termly reviews. Some parents say, oh, I've got my one plan, their school gave it to me 2 years ago and we've never had a review meeting. That's very common as well, that review meetings are not being held regularly. The other thing that's very common, parents saying you don't need a one planning meeting because we've got parents' evening coming up. That should not be happening in parents' evening. Schools saying you can have 7 minutes for your one planning meeting. Also, that's not acceptable. They should be allocated the time that's needed for those meetings. So, or I've also had parents being blocked from having parents' evening appointments because you've already had your one plan meeting. That's also not acceptable. Parents' evenings are to review curriculum. One planning is about the additional needs and support that the child needs. So when we're thinking about the supports that are put in place, I said to you at the beginning, it's a bit like the equal access thing. Writing's on the board, I can't access it, I need glasses. So we're thinking about, if you're a neurodiverse young person, you will need supports in other areas around cognition and learning, communication and interaction, social interactions, but also maybe emotional and mental health, and sensory needs. So your supports will need to be those 4 things, and if they're not on that plan, that means that support's not really adequate for that young person. So I've just put 2 examples on the board here, but I've got one that's got an example from each one of those 4 areas of need that I will email through to you. But I just wanted to show you here an example. Let me just pick this one down here, emotional awareness and self-regulation, which is a really big problem for so many children. So the first column, what we want to identify is long-term, what would we like the child to achieve? And when we say long-term, we mean by the end of the current phase of education. So that might be the end of primary school or the end of Key Stage 3, what have you. So long-term, we might want the young person to develop an awareness of his own internal emotional state and how to manage his emotions well. If you have autism, you will also have a condition called alexithymia, which is a lesser ability to recognise your own internal emotional state. So if you're neurotypical, you will know that what calm feels like, and you'll know what really stressed out feels like, and you will notice an escalation in your stress levels until you get to, this is intolerable for me. Usually what we do, as that escalates, we'll be thinking about, oh, I need to go and do something to bring myself back down again. I need to go for a walk, do some deep breathing, have a chocolate biscuit, I don't know what. But we're all aware of that escalating level of stress and tension. You don't have a good ability to do that if you're neurodiverse, which is why many children go from calm to meltdown like that, and parents and adults don't see it coming. So what we want this young person to do is to learn to develop an awareness of those stages. So the next steps would be, okay, what's achievable within this term, within this 12-week period? So actually what we want him to do is identify his internal state using an intervention called the Incredible 5-point scale during a one-to-one session with an adult. I didn't bring that with me today, but I can ping you the link to it. There's a website that you can look at. There's resources on there. So then what we say is, well, currently, where is this young person? Well, currently, he can become very overwhelmed very suddenly because he's not been able to recognise this increasing level of stress of anxiety. So he might start shouting rude things to people or kicking the chair over or storming out of the room, these kind of sudden explosions. So then we identify what intervention or strategy we're going to use here. So obviously I've just identified the Incredible 5-point scale, but what we're going to do is each session we're going to focus on a previous event that young person has experienced. We're going to look at, do you remember last week when the teacher said, 7 times 7, and you pushed the chair over and you walked? Let's just have a look at what was happening for you then. And then we need to say how often and who is going to do this. So this is going to happen every day for 20 minutes with one-to-one support from a teaching assistant. And each session is going to be recorded with a level of success. And then in the review period, this is where you have the meeting with the family and the school, and you look together about, well, let's look, how many times was this done? How successful was it? Where are we with it right now? Then we need to reset the target. What I commonly find is that the targets that are long-term targets are set for this term, and that means that they're not achieved, so they get rolled over again and again and again. And if that's happening, that says to me that target has not been written specifically enough. It's saying to me that's much more of a long-term target. And if we're wanting the child to develop an awareness of we don't do this and we don't, how are we going to help them to learn that? Because you can't just say they've just got to learn. Because of their neurodivergence, they're not going to be able to learn that incidentally. We need to spell that out for them. Now, obviously, here I've put here a daily session for one-to-one support, and that might be what a young person needs, but there might be other interventions that don't require somebody being there all the time. It might be that what we want is this young person to be able to self-regulate and rejoin the group. So actually, once they've gone out and they've been allowed to go and sit in their calming area and watch their YouTube clips of cats or whatever they want to do, that they're able to then come back in again. So it might not be that there's a one-to-one person there, but actually what we do is we just record, they've gone out, they've been gone that many minutes, they come back and the teacher or the member of support staff checks in, doing okay, do you want to come and do this now? That somebody just helps them back in the room. And that can be identified on here as well, but it just needs to be consistent. And I think that one of the things that many parents will say is that sometimes things are identified on plans and they're not implemented. Sometimes things are implemented once and then not implemented again. And sometimes children have things spelled out from professionals that they need and schools say, I'm sorry, we haven't got the resources to do that. And I get that, but that's not okay. It's not okay that a child who has a clearly identified need is not having that need met. We wouldn't say to a child who's a wheelchair user, you've still got to go out and go and play rugby on the field like everybody else. Sorry, we haven't got any modifications for you. You wouldn't do that. And yet somehow this is what's being expected of our neurodiverse population of young people. So what would happen is you'd have this plan that's specifically written, and again, in the SEND code of practice, it clearly states this should be a co-production. That means it should be a three-way conversation between the parent, the school, and the child or young person where that's appropriate. It's not supposed to be that the school writes something and then send it home, this is your child's new plan. Now, that's supposed to be a conversation, a co-production. And again, I would say that's something that doesn't consistently happen. So what I advise parents to do is go away, look at my template, think about your child, what could that look like? What do you think that support could look like? And have a go at populating that plan. So when you go to your meeting, you're appreciative of the staff and say, I know you're working really hard, we appreciate your time. We've been having to think at home about what might help, and we've come along with this. Maybe that could be a helpful basis for us to start this conversation. So what we want, we've got this army of amazing parents, some of them you've met today, who know a lot about their children, who could help schools, could be this really useful resource to them. And actually they've got access to the support within the Maze community and this early support pathway. They've got support to be able to do that. So we're trying to think all the time about, to acknowledge the challenges that schools are facing, but still make sure that our children get their needs met. Because ultimately, where you've got children's needs who are not being met, you've got children who are not going to want to come into that school environment. And we would all feel like that, wouldn't we? If you had to spend all day, every day in this very, very stressful environment, you wouldn't want to go either. For me personally, I think that there are an awful lot of mixed messages about coming into school. So we had COVID, suddenly no one was allowed to come to school, and it was all done online. And for some young people, that was perfect. Some young people, neurodiverse young people, loved that. I'm not saying everybody did, but some of them did. Some of them loved the fact that they could do some at home and go into school for some of it. And I remember we're having this transition period back into end of lockdown, back to schools. And for about, excuse me. And for about 6 weeks, the messaging was, we just need this gently approach because, children need to have the time they take to get back to it. After about 6 weeks, those messages were gone. And parents were starting to come to me saying, I've had this really stroppy letter from the school about my child not coming back again. So you've got a lot of young people thinking, well, actually, it suited me fine learning at home with teams, and why can't I still do that when I could do it before? Then you've also got the messaging about parents saying, my child, they're having a terrible mental health anxiety today, and these stern messages from school about you need to come here no matter what. But yet sometimes the school will say to a parent, you can't send your child today because we've got this going on, can you keep them at home? Or they've been sick, they have to stay home for 2 days. So for parents and young people, the messaging from schools around this is so mixed. It doesn't add up or make sense at all, because I really want young people to get an education. I know we've got an army of neurodiverse kids out there who are brilliant, who've got brilliant minds. And so I think enabling our kids to be in an environment that's not stressful, encouraging them with the things that they're passionately committed to, where they excel, and then having that emotional connection with them and making sure that they feel emotionally supported. It feels like you're on their team. And for all young people, I feel like nobody's the finished product by the time they're 16, are they? Everybody develops and evolves in their own way, in their own time. So I think it's just about that. And I feel like the part I play in that is helping parents have faith in their ability to guide their children forwards and to encourage their children to have ambitions and goals and drive and determination in life, and definitely resilience, because they'll need that in droves.
So can I add to that as well, that actually a lot of our SEND kids are cognitively, emotionally and socially delayed in their developmental, I think probably 2 or 3 years. There's different studies on it to say exactly what, but it's a general thing. So actually, quite often it's just time.
Just kind of conclusions here really for us from today. What we want to see is good quality SEND provision. And I feel like, obviously we're here starting this conversation today, and working with yourselves, I think, is just one part of what could be improved with this. So I think good quality SEND provision. So hopefully from today you'll have a bit more of a thought about where we're coming from, and I will email over a bunch of stuff for you as well, so you've got good templates to refer back to. You can contact me anytime if you want my advice or ask me about anything. I think that schools should be better at scrutinising the attendance summaries that they have, to look at which of the kids on here have got special educational needs. Okay, now that we know they have, let's try and understand a little bit more what's going on. Let's try and unpick this a little bit more. And I think that we need to identify the support that the schools need to be providing before we have this escalating conversation about where we go with this. I think, for me personally, that's the biggest barrier that we have here, is the capacity and the accountability within schools around their SEND provision. And I think that is compounded by the fact that we now have, most schools are academies, so they're private companies, aren't they? They're not even really accountable to the local authority anymore, even though, ironically, they're all funded by public money. So I think there's a big issue there for me. Where there are issues within the family that's impacting on the young person, then I would like to think that from today, hopefully you have a bit more knowledge about the early support offers that there are. And I'm not saying that it's not possible for our SEND families to be having issues of attendance that are just because they need to just be firmer and have boundaries. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But I would like to think that we would take a little bit longer to unpick that and work with families. So I know, for example, one family I'm working with, the mum is not very good at setting boundaries for her son, and he's gaming well into the evening. I know, ironic, right? Pot and kettle. But I know this is a problem, but I can see within that family, this mum has such high levels of anxiety, implementing boundaries is a problem for her. And I think if I were, or actually ideally it would like Family Solutions need to work with this family, if they were able to work with her to build her confidence, that would tackle the issue. Whereas the issue of escalating pressure around attendance is not going to resolve that issue. So I would like there just to be more focus around, okay, how can we make sure that family get the support they need to tackle this issue? I've spoken with the Essex County Council that the first contact with families should be supportive in tone and not threatening, and I know that comes from those template letters. So that's a conversation I'm having with the local authority as well, that we need to have a conversation around that. And can we change the intensity on the focus of attendance at all costs? And can we shift it instead to engagement within education? What that looks like for young people, bearing in mind we've got these mixed messages about you can't come to school, now you have to come to school, and what have you. And then currently where there are difficulties with SEND provision, that parents then feeling their only alternative is seeking an education, health and care plan. Because actually if that SEND provision were better, there wouldn't be so many people chasing. So for me, desired long-term outcomes, and I would be really happy for you to go away and think about this and come back to me with your thoughts and reflections, but I would like to explore and identify the challenges and obstacles to achieving this model of good practice within Essex. Can we work together to contribute to how that process is managed in our county? Can we, I hope from today, we can start the process of working together to enhance the experience that our neurodiverse young people have in relation to conversations about attendance, but also in relation to their school experiences. And can we between us agree some working practices so that we can look at how can we collaborate, communicate, work together. I just feel like we've got such a great opportunity here. Here you all are, you've given up your time today to come and listen to me bleat on, and I really appreciate that. That says to me everything about how open you are to the idea of working and talking, and I think I'd love us to be able to capitalise on that and show everybody else what good practice looks like.